No,
It's
she
like
does. She does. She prods from the. In fact, if she hasn't got a pen and paper next to her, so she can't even write me little notes today. So you might hear
okay.
bewusst.
I can't. Yeah, right. Anyway,
Anyway,
thank you
so
for having. Yeah,
Joanne Hichens, welcome to Life in a Garden Online. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's fantastic to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to chatting and answering any questions.
Yeah, we'll open the floor to the public a bit later, but let you and me and have a lovely sleigh bed. Let you and me have a bit of a chat quickly. Yes, it is hot. We've had 5 seasons in Joburg today. Joanne,
Okay.
death and after. And then it went off. Death and after parties. Why did you feel you needed to write a memoir?
Yeah, I think writers just use their lives. I mean, that's what I do. And when things happen in your life, I certainly just turn to whatever's happening and rework it in some form, I suppose, as an exploration of my life and exploration of what is happening in my life. So and I'd always kept notes, kept a diary, and after my husband died, that didn't change. I basically kept on writing notes, and now instead of writing about my swim and the kids, I was suddenly writing about my husband and my husband not being there. And I'd originally actually wanted to do a PhD, which I had registered for in December, and the PhD was going to be on loss in the city. I wanted to examine Cape Town and look at it as a place of loss. People have lost land, they've lost dignity, they've lost their lives, the crime rate is very high. So that's the angle that I was going to come from. And then my husband Robert died, and it just fitted perfectly into this PhD. And I actually asked the supervisor if I could basically just shift the subject matter and include his death. So he became almost subject matter in the end. And I think that's also a way I dealt with his death. Life carries on. You've got to keep on going with your projects. So the PhD was abandoned a few months later, but I had already started taking notes about Robert's death, and I thought, well, I'm simply going to keep on writing about it and turn it into a memoir. And it was therapeutic and a way to deal with my grief. So for all of those reasons, that's why I started. And I've always been interested in memoir writing. And I thought, well, this is a story and I'm going to write it. Even if I write it just for myself and for my children, I'm going to finish it. So
it's very much a breakaway piece from your usual sort of genres, YA and crime fiction.
Yes, yeah. I've written many columns for News 24, the Cape Times, and often that stuff was more personal, about my daughter turning 18, about adolescence, about the personal stuff in my life. And I've always been interested in memoir writing. So it was almost a natural progression. And it comes more easily than the crime writing. I really do enjoy writing memoir. So, perhaps I'm going to be doing more of it and doing the crime writing. It's difficult to decide.
You actually deal in the book with... In the book,
life gives us so much material to write about that. Yeah, I feel that's my groove at the moment. So we'll see. Yeah.
In the book, you actually deal with the loss in the city as well. I mean, you explore... That's almost a macabre thing about you, is you start exploring graveyards and memorial sites and reading headstones and things. I thought that was the only thing we did when we were tourists, going to places.
Going to graveyards, because you get a real sense of society and history and who died of what. I love graveyards. Yes, look, that tied very much into my PhD, which was going to graveyards, trying to assess what people died of, looking at soldiers' memorials, as well as the different sections of the cemetery. And I was really interested in Maitland Cemetery. That's what I wanted to focus on. And as I started to write this very personal stuff about Robert's death, about how I was with him, driving him in the car to Constantiaberg on the day he died, how my children reacted, how I reacted to them, how I cried and got drunk in my bed and did all sorts of dreadful things. It was very personal. but I still found this hankering to make it a bigger story, to extend that personal story into the city, into something that was just broader than just me and my personal story. And that was actually something that held up the writing, because I couldn't decide if it was going to be a slim memoir, which was just going to be about Robert, the moment that I dropped him off at the hospital to, perhaps a month afterwards or after the funeral. So basically just focusing on his death, or if I was going to extend it into the city. And yeah, they were, I had friends who read the different versions, and they gave me different feedback. And in the end, as a writer, you've got to make your own choices. And because I do feel that it's part of the fabric of the city, he loved the city, he loved Muizenberg, I had to basically do some exploration of the city and keep in those bits about the graveyard.
Sorry, I just have to silence the...
That's fine. Is it the dog? Not your mom?
Dog's no, that's the mom's not growling at the moment. She'll start just now.
I'm enamored with you.
Hello. Yeah. So, and because I love graveyards, for me it was a pleasure to wander around Maitland. And it's a very interesting graveyard, because there's a historic section where my grandmother is buried. And she's actually buried right next door to John X. Merriman, who was an ex-governor of the Cape, a very important man in his colonial day. And yet the historical section of Maitland is so badly looked after that the graves have all subsided, they're falling down, the headstones are crumbling, gangs go into the graveyards at night to have their parties, they break the headstones. So it's incredibly sad from that level to go into that old section of Waltermade. But yeah, so grandmother is there, and my opa is also there in the Wall of Remembrance. And yeah, so for me, it's a personal place where I have family, and then I have extended my my trips to the graveyard, to the newer sections, where the only segregation is really religious, if any. You've got the Zabas and the Fanikaks and whoever, they're all lying side by side in smaller plots. And yeah, the newer part of Maitland Cemetery actually looks very much like the haphazard way that Cape Town looks. You've got tiny little graves, you've got people who haven't even had the money to pay for proper gravestones, so they've stuck in a wooden cross. And then you've got a couple who've clearly wanted to be buried together, and they have erected a massive granite stone for themselves. So it's an interesting place and gives one a sense of history and of our current situation too. So yes, so that's the graveyard section of the book.
It's a very grave subject we have here.
Yeah. But look, I hope that I write about it in a fun way as well, because I met interesting people in the graveyard. I met Varushka, who runs the whole place. I don't know if she still does, but she saw me sitting on a bench and she asked if I'd like to have a cup of Coke, and we started chatting and we started talking about eco graveyards, and from that she started to just tell me stories about how land is so limited in Cape Town that we actually have to now reconsider the way we bury people. And then on my way out of the graveyard, there were two men selling boerewors rolls and pork sausages, and they said to me, yeah, come and have some of our braai here, yeah, and cheap for you lovely darling, it's kind of typical Cape talk. And then I said to them, oh, I thought I smelled braaivleis, in Maitland. And they said to me, no, you didn't smell our braaivleis. You smelled the kind of braaivleis that happens there in the
crematorium. Lovely.
The crematorium. Yeah. So I had lots of adventures in the graveyard. And my friend Heather, she was very cross with me. She would say, do not go alone to the graveyard because people get mugged and attacked. Yeah, at one stage I got a call from her and she said, where are you? And I said, I'm in the graveyard. And she had an absolute freak out. So, and I put little bits and pieces of that in the book. So it's not really a study of the graveyard. It's really me wandering through the graveyard, talking to the gardeners, photographing things.
Seeing dead people.
Sorry, seeing dead people. Yeah, but when you have a dead person of your own, it becomes quite comforting to look at all these gravestones and know that everybody has suffered, that everyone has a person of their own. Every live person who's going to a graveyard goes for the purpose of burying someone or visiting someone or decorating the grave. And there was something so comforting about that I almost felt more at home in the graveyard with all these dead people than I did getting back to the city, where I had to deal with rates bills and explaining my story and looking after children. And I just felt that in the graveyard, I was more at peace. And I think that's why I hung out there with my umbrella and my sun hat. And sometimes I would take friends. So
little picnic.
Take our tea and settle down and look around and make sure no one was about to mug us. But so that's one section of the book. I mean, I can keep talking, or would you like to ask me?
Well, I was just waiting for a gap so I could get a word in edgewise there.
Sorry.
Joanne, you have a 4 of your own deaths in this book to actually deal with. In quick succession as well. So
yeah.
Was writing the book a way of dealing and processing with that grief?
Yes. I had written part of this book probably a number of years before, because the first part of the book deals with my mother's death. She died of a cancer called mesothelioma, which is a asbestos-related cancer. So we're not too sure where she picked it up. She did live near an asbestos mine when she was a little girl. And it takes something like 50 years for asbestos cancer to metastasize. But, we all had asbestos heaters on our walls. My dad used asbestos screw plug to stick in holes in the walls before he put in new nails. Hair dryers still have asbestos cores, which heats up very well. So if that asbestos gets broken, you can literally get contaminated from any of those items. And anyway, so to get to her death, she died in a hospice, and my sister and I held vigil for her as she died. But she was 78 years old. She'd had the most fabulous life as a diplomat. She traveled to so many beautiful countries in the world, lived in them, visited the most scenic sites, had a very happy marriage with my father, who was an ambassador for the later years of his life with the South African Nationalist Party. But then, interestingly enough, he redeemed himself by not joining the ANC, but when there was the transition government, he stayed on to be Nelson Mandela's chief of protocol for a number of years. So I always felt,
best chief of protocol he ever had.
Best chief of protocol Nelson Mandela ever had. And also I felt, kind of redeemed. I was no longer this child of this man who worked exclusively for the National Party. I was this child of a man who worked very closely with Nelson Mandela. So, and that's something I deal with in the book as well, is just growing up and the guilt around apartheid and the guilt of knowing that your parents are on the wrong side of the fence. But to get back to my mom's death, so my sister and I held vigil, and when she finally died, it was expected and almost a relief. She had been told that she would die within 6 weeks, and she died literally to the day after she'd been diagnosed. And there was absolutely nothing the doctors could do. There was no chemotherapy. All she could do was go on morphine and settle her affairs, which she did. So I discuss this in the book, and I talk about it as the expected death, which is much easier. And some people might dispute that. Some people have expected deaths of parents or brothers or whoever that they never get over. So I'm not going to say it's always this way. But for me, certainly, the expected death seemed easier because she'd had a good life, because she'd had a strong marriage, because of all those things. She'd accepted her death, she'd spoken about it. Then, so I'd written that part of the book. So I actually thought that I could do death. You know, I felt quite smug about it. But when my husband died a few years later, very unexpectedly, he woke up one morning, Saturday morning, in this very bedroom, in the bed behind me. And he said he doesn't feel well. And he had the typical symptoms: pain in the arm, tight chest. And, you know, you've kind of watched so many medical dramas on TV that you kind of know what this is. So I just said, get in the car, let's go to the hospital. And excuse that noise, it's my gutters busy falling off. They're going to be fixed tomorrow. It sounds like a machine gun fire. So yeah, I took him to the hospital, left all the kids at home, dropped him off. And when I came back 15 minutes later, a couple of nurses were waiting for me, and they said, we need you to come with us. And I knew at that stage that something was not good. And when I got into this ward that they took me to, they said, we need you to sit down. And that's actually when I said to them, I said, I have watched so much Grey's Anatomy in my life. I know exactly what it means. When you people tell family to sit down, it's bad news. So of course, in the end, I did sit down, and they were very caring and brought me water. And they just said that he'd had a massive coronary and there was nothing they could do about it, and that he had passed. So yeah, so that was very, very traumatic and completely unexpected. I mean, I still thought that I would take him to hospital and he would maybe get a stent, or they would tell him it's indigestion, or, you know, he'd spend a few days rest cure at hospital and come home. But of course, it didn't happen that way. So that's what I explored in, I think it's the second part of the book, which is really about the unexpected death and how it can be so incredibly painful. And for me, it was because we had argued the night before. We'd actually had a full-on fight because, well, I won't go into all the details of that, but it's a terrible, terrible feeling when you haven't made up with your other half.
When you've unfriended him on Facebook as well.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly what I did. I pressed the unfriend button on Facebook. I said, yes, you know, you're out of my life. And of course, the next day he was gone, and there's no recourse then. You know, you can't rewind time. So yeah, and then we called the kids, and the kids came and said goodbye to him. And so really it was traumatic for all of us, that unexpected death. And that part deals with the funeral, with the loneliness, you know, what happens after death, with this dreadful silence that you don't anticipate, because your home has always been filled with the noise that person produces, whether it's music or fighting, and suddenly it was just so completely quiet and empty, and that was really terrible for me. And I drank a lot. I'm still drinking a lot, but I'm trying to cut down.
Your book is very graphic, and you're very honest. In fact, you're honest to the point that it's actually brutal at times.
Yeah.
How has that gone over with people?
Yeah, I was very, very nervous to publish because of that. But it seems that people are really almost grateful for it, because I really tried to tell the truth, my truth. And my truth was that I drank too much and fell asleep on the couch and neglected the kids. And once I even vomited in my own bed. I vomited first in the passage and then in my own bed, because I had drunk myself into this stupor. And one of my daughters, who was 18 at that time, you know, had to come to me the next morning and say, Mom, you know, it's disgraceful. We know you've lost your husband, but, you know, and also we are not cleaning up your mess. And they had to say to me, you have to do more with your life than just be a drunk and watch really bad reality television shows, because that's really kind of all I was doing. So that was a bit of a wake-up call. And look, I mean, my life is a bit of an open book, and I felt that I want to tell that truth. I want to write it the way it was. So yeah, and then I write about other things in the other sections of the book, which are also kind of very personal. Yeah, you must just stop me if you want to ask something. I mean,
No,
do you
that's
want
fine.
to?
I was getting ready to interject and ask about your siblings. I mean,
My siblings, yes.
your
Yeah, okay, I was
siblings,
going to talk about them. Yeah, my siblings.
is your relationship with them still a bit fraught, or are you on a better, more even keel now?
With my sister, yeah. Yeah, then 3 months after my husband died, my father died. His was also an unexpected death, but still it was losing a very important man in my life, having to say goodbye to him. And he died in Still Bay. So I went up there with my children, and we all had a chance to say goodbye. So it was an unexpected death. But on the very same weekend, my mother-in-law, Robert's mother, she committed suicide. She took pills. She just could never get over the fact that her youngest son had died. And I think he was the favored child. So, and she was very religious. So it went against all her beliefs. She had been an incredible Christian her whole life. And my take on it is that this was God just pulling the rug out from under her, and she could not cope with it at all. So she was also put on medication, and we're still not sure if it was grief or a combination of grief and medication, but she took pills. And of course, I got this call when I was in Still Bay dealing with my dad, who just died 18 hours previously. And it was my daughter to say something's happened to Granny. And then she proceeded to tell me that Granny had died. At first, I thought, oh my God, Granny's been attacked. What's happened to Granny? Or she's fallen and broken her hip. But yeah, and my daughter actually was one of the people who found her with the paramedics. Because I still said to Louise, I'm sure Granny's at peace now. And she said, no, Granny's not at peace. Granny had blood coming from her mouth, and Granny's shirt had been ripped open because the paramedics had tried to revive her. So, there were aspects of that as well, that I was trying to, my children not only then lost their father, but they lost their grandfather, and they lost their grandmother. And my sister, yeah, you asked about the siblings. After my father died, my sister and I almost reverted to roles of childhood. And I'm complicit in this as well, but we had to sort the spoils. And, and I've heard of things like this happening before, that families start to fight over who's going to get what, who's going to get the family silver, and, who's going to get the cupboard or the dresser or whatever. And it's not that we fought, it's just that, yeah, I suppose we did fight, but it was suddenly as if without our parents, we were able to express all the obnoxious anxiety, the obnoxious feelings that we'd had towards one another. So my sister, for instance, said to me, when I had chosen something, because we were supposed to take turns, and my father was very specific about this. She said, you always get to choose first. You always get the best stuff. So, there was that part of it, was dealing with siblings, dealing with who's going to get what, how to be fair about everything, and also just dealing with suddenly becoming little kids again, not having resolved our issues. And my brother was also there. He was probably the most civilized of the three of us. I do have an older brother, but he lives in America, and he wasn't very concerned about getting anything much at all. So the three of us kind of sorted it out. Yeah, and I've written about this in the book as well. What happens after death? Because you have the unexpected death, you have the expected death, you have funerals, and these are all the after parties in a sense. And then you have sorting the spoils, which is a kind of a party, maybe a party no one would want to be at. Yeah. But, you kind of, everything gets dished out, dealing with lawyers. That's also sort of a strange, macabre party. Sorry, I just want to switch that off.
Can I ask you about the new wife? Because I didn't see it in the book, but how did she cope? Because suddenly the 3 adult children are now in the house going through stuff and helping themselves. What was hers?
Yeah. I think that she was very gracious, and I didn't say so in the book because I was a bit pissed off with her at the time. She hadn't come to see my dad's body. And also, I must say, I was angry with everybody because my husband had died. And it was as if nobody could really understand that my husband had died. It was this momentous, and this caused issues with me and my siblings as well, because I wanted them really to acknowledge that. So yes, at the time, the second wife, my father's second wife, who was a lovely woman, she was actually more gracious than I gave her credit for in the book. Because the very day my dad died, my brother and I came home from the hospital and we started sorting right then and there. In fairness to my brother, he had to go overseas within a week, so he was quite keen to get things on the road. But we just ripped up papers and shredded things and did things that we perhaps, should never have done. And at one stage, the new wife, the second wife, that's the gutters again, came downstairs and she just said to us, please, do you really need to be doing this? And then I think we got the message and went to bed. But still, there were things that needed to be done. And I think my brother wanted to find the will, which he did find. So, there is that too. You want to know, where you feature in the will. So, but yeah, things were pretty much evenly divided amongst everybody. So that wasn't issue. It was really just about the things, who was going to get what things. And I write about it as well, that we all grow up, as children or as married women or men with a texture of our household stuff, all the stuff that we have lived with, that our parents have bought or that we've bought. We've been tourists in another land and we bring back trinkets, or, my parents had a lot of old brown ball and claw furniture, and they'd always said to us, oh, this will be worth something one day. In the final equation, it was really worth nothing.
Yeah.
But because it's sentimental value to us, we still
intrinsic value.
Yeah. So for me, that was a bit of a tragedy and a sadness that a lot of our sibling fighting was around stuff which was actually in the end just not valuable. And even things like a little bonsai painting that my dad had collected. I took it to be auctioned, and they couldn't sell it because my father, bless his heart and soul, had painted over this bonsai painting with a very thick lacquer, and they couldn't remove it. We even took it to an art restorer, and they said it's going to reduce its value by at least 2/3. So yeah, and then there were other things as well that just ended up just not having any value at all. So I write about that as well, because you're not just negotiating a death, you are negotiating what comes after death, which is not only sorting the spoils, but going to Telcom and cancelling accounts and organizing funerals and filling in death certificates, and
it's not really time to grieve.
No, there isn't really a lot of time to grieve. Well, you kind of have to fit that in as well. Yeah. So
that becomes like a delayed process. The whole grief process becomes something that's delayed and that you walk into unexpectedly 3 months, 6 months, 8 months later.
Yes, yeah. And I still remember going to my gynecologist and lying on her plinth, getting my yearly pap smear, legs open and the whole trip. And she had lost her partner a good number of years back. And I just said to her, how long does it take? That was my refrain. How long until I feel better? How long until I get used to this? And I've heard this from other people who have lost people, and they've asked me as well, in your experience, how long will it take before I feel okay? And I think people want that reassurance that, sure, you know what, I can survive this. And the gynae said to me, she said 5 years. And then it was only about a year. And I just remember lying on her plinth thinking, oh my God, I've got another 4 years of this pain. Because grieving is about pain. It's intellectually, you know that that person isn't there. You know you cannot talk to that person. You can't hold their hand. But also, I think one's body is so used to having, particularly a partner who, and Robert was a good partner. We slept in the same bed, we hugged, we held hands, we were close. We sat and watched TV together. So my body was used to his body. And just suddenly, his body was no longer there. So what do you do then? You know, because I think I believe in something called cell memory. Your body actually has got memories. It's like, it's like playing the piano. If you play every day, you know exactly what notes to press. And it's as if my body still wanted to play the piano. And there was suddenly just no piano. There was no Robert. There was no Robert to touch. There was no Robert to hold. And I would even do things like quickly look on the couch to see if he wasn't actually there, because my brain could also just not believe it. So intellectually, I knew that he died, but my brain and my body took a long time to catch up. So my brain still, I'd hear the gate close at the front of the house, and I'd immediately think, oh, he's home. And then suddenly I'd have to think, no, he's never coming home. Or I'd wake up in the morning and I'd reach over to his side of the bed and expecting, my body would expect a warm patch or to find his body. And it just wasn't there. It would just be the cold sheet. And then, I'd have to, again, intellectually tell myself that he's not there. So, yeah.
Do you feel anger at the way life just goes on? Here I'm grieving, I'm in pain, I'm really, really miserable, and you're laughing at something funny and getting on with your life and going shopping like nothing's happening. So I am the widow, notice me.
I am the widow, absolutely. And I write about that in the book as well. I walk the dogs a lot at a local flea down here. And I would literally go up to people with their dogs. And, the dogs are friendly, so you've already got that introduction. But I would literally go to people and I would announce that my husband just died, or that my husband died a month ago, or that my husband died 3 months ago. I would go and tell them. And generally people were really kind. They would talk to me or they would give me a hug. I mean, these complete strangers. And then we talk about their dogs and my dog. But yes, I wanted to be noticed. I wanted my pain to be felt. And I think that was the problem with my siblings, is that they weren't able to. And, I think I understand now, perhaps I'm more compassionate towards them. But, when our dad died, I think for my brother and my sister, that was a huge blow. And perhaps I didn't fully realize that. But I still wanted them to acknowledge me and to acknowledge the fact that, I was now not only a single parent, I was an only parent. Yeah, an orphan and an only parent. That with a divorce, you can phone the husband and you can say, come and collect the kids this weekend. But an only parent is not able to do that. You've got these kids 24/7. And yeah, the two of them were older, 18 and 20, or 17 and 20, but my son was 11 and he was very, it hit him very hard. So that was really, really difficult for him. Yes, so I wanted people to know. And I think I wanted people to know not only about me, but about my husband. I didn't want them to forget him. I didn't want them to forget his memory. I wanted to remind people all the time that he had lived. And I think, getting back to graveyards, that's my fascination about graveyards, because that's the one place where you can go, where you are just reminded en masse that all of these people, the survivors created memorials to these people whom they had loved and want to remember in some way. And so just knowing that I was part of that tribe of wanting to remember my husband. And yeah.
Can we talk a
So
little bit about your writing process? So
sure.
like at what point did you think, well, let me kick off with Mom? Did you have to, how did you work out in what order to work, you know, to process it in and to write it in and to move along that way?
I thought that she was the first death and it was unexpected. And when she died, I actually wrote articles for the Cape Times about it. I wrote about her in hospice before she had died. Excuse me. And then I wrote about her death afterwards. And I still remember Robert, my husband, saying, "Phew, how can you do this? You're exposing yourself and your mother and your family." But my father had said, just write whatever you want. That's what writers do. Just do what you need to do. So for me, she was always the first major death and the one that I needed to start the story off with. And then Robert was the next death. And then my father, and then the mother-in-law. So it just had that kind of natural progression. And then, of course, you know, my process, I'd written about the graveyards. I'd written a little bit about COVID. I've written about, recovery. I helped some of my friends in their dealings with grief. So then as a writer, you start looking at the structure. How am I going to put this together? And I had 100,000 words, you know, that was 20,000 words too long. So I had to look at it and decide which bits to cut, which bits to juggle with. And I start the book off with a walk down in Muizenberg because I felt I want people to know the setting of Muizenberg. I want them to, when they read the book, I want them to have a sense of where this all happened. So that is the process really of just having all these words, having some gut feel of how it's all going to hang together, but then just to working towards refining it. And for me, structure is always a really important thing to look at.
Speaking of structure, can we talk about this amazing cover that your book has? Okay,
Yes,
I absolutely love this cover. Just spoke to me on so many levels. First of all, it's a ceramic heart, and as we know, ceramics is very close to my heart. The decor on the heart is chinoiserie, which is the Chinese art of the blue and the white, and
right.
And then the kintsugi.
Yes,
which you explain in the book as well, being the Japanese art of putting things back together again. How did that come about?
Yeah, there's a chapter in the book called, I think it's the last section, called Recovery. And this is the point where I get off the couch. I don't go to graveyards anymore. I have got to look after my kids. And I start doing things, often with friends, like going to gym. I rediscovered yoga. Let me rephrase. I discovered yoga. My friend said, let's do yoga. And I said, so I've never done yoga. I'm more an aerobics person. Yoga is for, kind of.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go. You've got to live in Komiki to do yoga, one of those people. But from the very first session, I found it so incredibly calming. And all the breath work really helped me to calm myself down. So I just kept on going to yoga, and I just found it really helpful in terms of recovery. And then I started doing other things. A friend of mine had cancer, and I started taking her to her chemotherapy sessions and waiting for her. So I felt useful in that way. And then, the kintsugi. I did a very brief kind of online, and it wasn't even a course, but it's something that I'd always wanted to do. And we've got so many broken dishes in the cupboard that I took a couple of my mother's plates and I fixed them with gold leaf and glue, and none of them looked great, I must say. But it's all of these aspirations to try and fix one's life, to try and create meaning. because you start to think in grief, what is the meaning? How do these things happen? These things that I feel I can't recover from. And in fact, the designer picked up on that, the kintsugi in the book. And she came up with this idea of having this porcelain heart on the cover. And I just thought, yeah, it's lovely. We had some other covers. There was a cover with a skull on it, which I really absolutely loved. And I wasn't afraid of it at all. And it had beautiful flowers, kind of growing from the skull. But I started to show it around.
Painting like that. Where is it?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, you'll have to take a photo and send it to me.
Well, I'll send it to you.
Yeah. And I loved that cover. But between me and the designer and Karina Surik, who's the publisher, Monique Oberholzer is the designer, we felt that it was just too frightening and might put readers off. So we needed a softer image. So when Monique came up with this porcelain heart, we just thought, yes, that's it. It speaks to the whole issue, Robert's heart attack, because really the whole thing revolves around Robert, the whole book. His heart attack, also mending one's heart, taking the broken pieces, putting them together, creating something more beautiful in a way. I mean, I don't think my life could ever be more beautiful or fixed in a sense without Robert. But, you have to move on. And this is something that's very clear in the book, that people die all the time.
Particularly at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
your book is more relevant right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. I thought when we first brought it out, because between waiting for a publisher and editing and the designing, really, I'd finished this book a couple of years ago. And that's quite a frustrating thing, is just having to wait. So anyone in the, writing profession knows, that waiting is a difficult thing to do. I'd actually just, and it was coming out in mid-COVID, and I thought, oh, it's just the worst time. But in fact, it's been a really good time, and the sales have been reasonable, and the book has been well received. And maybe it is because people are suffering and people feel so many losses, and, not only death, it's loss of our own autonomy, loss just not being able to go to the beaches. There's so much loss. And really this book is about, I suppose, the general theme is loss. Death definitely is the main character in a sense, but underlying that is loss, how we deal with loss. So so that's how the kintsugi came about. And I'd love to do more of it, maybe do it really properly. Break a few more dishes.
Go to a Greek restaurant and just break some plates.
Yeah.
Are there any questions for her, Joanne? Please post them in the chat box and I'll relay them to her. Who? My mom wants to know, how long ago did your husband pass away?
7 years ago. And what I did in the book, I took a bit of artistic license, because if I had to spin the story out from the moment he died to now, it would be very long. And I think this is what, memoirists do. Memoir is not autobiography. Autobiography is factual. You tell things how they are, precise dates. I have meshed things into a tighter time span. I think I've covered a year and a half in the book. Which took me kind of 4 years really to write and to complete. But so he died 7 years ago. And actually, I think my gynecologist was right. It was after around 5 years that I started feeling okay. But other people I've spoken to, they still mourn their spouses. Some women I know, they say they'll never get over it, and it's 10 years later. Or people have lost a child and they've been altered forever, or so there's no hard and fast rules about how long the mourning should take. But I still miss him, and it often happens around public dates, Christmas, birthday, graduations, and then I'm the one that's got to be there for the kids, and I have been. But that's when I feel it most. I want someone to be there to share it and to prop us all up. But
Have you, okay, now I have to ask this question. Have you not met anybody?
Yes, I have actually. Yeah. So it's not something that I really talk about, but I have met someone, and we actually live together now. So yes.
And are your kids okay with
You know
that?
what? I feel guilty actually,
Why?
even talking about it, that I've met someone and that I allowed myself to be, swept away by someone else. So yeah, and you know what? I think it's a good thing. I mean, I would say to anybody out there that loses a husband or a spouse that, yeah, we also deserve happiness and kindness in our lives. And if we can meet someone who helps us with that, then I think that's really important.
Mom
Yeah.
and I
So
were discussing that very thing today,
yeah.
and how often the children resent the person that you bring into your life.
Yes. Yeah.
Because then,
Yeah.
then they're replaced, but your kids are a bit older. So I think maybe
Yeah,
it's.
my kids are a bit older. Yeah, they did resent it at first, but I think they were actually quite relieved because they could stop looking after me. They knew then that I had someone who was there with me, and they could kind of get on with their own lives, because I think they were very worried about me at some stage of their lives. So yeah, and I haven't written about that in the book, because even though I met, yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, also a man called Robert. So I think actually that's why we fell in love. He told me his name's Robert. So I thought, okay, all right, that's cool. Yeah. So life goes on, and people say, yes, time heals. I don't think time heals. I don't think, well, that's not what it's about for me. Time
No,
softens.
it incorporates.
Time, yeah, it incorporates, softens.
It just becomes part of who you are. You carry that pain as part of your being.
Yeah, and it's just, and it comes back sometimes with intensity, but a lot of the time you just get on with things. And my son the other day, he wrote a poem, and it was so touching because the poem is really about not remembering his father's face any longer. And I just thought that's almost what happens. The person becomes the lost person, the dead person, and we still love them and we remember them, but we just remember them
A little bit more blurred.
more vaguely.
Yeah, the edges are softened. Yeah, I have to. When you mentioned your son, I now have to plug my niece. I'm going to have to put you in touch with, because she's just she lost her father also about 7 years ago. He died of he had like a form of blood cancer, and they struggled for years, and then eventually his heart just gave out. And she would write poetry. She writes. And to go to work through her grief, she's written a whole lot of poetry, and she put it on Instagram. And she has quite a few followers, bless her, I must say. And a guy approached her and said, "I'd like to publish your poetry." So
Brilliant.
she is now. The book has just come out.
Yeah.
It's quite depressing poetry, because it's all about grief and sadness and whatever. And her book has just come out about, I can't even think of the title right now. I'll send you a picture.
Okay. Well, congratulations.
The proud aunt. What can I say?
Yeah, absolutely. But people don't talk enough about death. We don't write enough about death. And there's a poetry project called the Avbob Poetry Project. I don't know if you have
heard of the Avbob, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And they do these wonderful volumes. I think they've done it for 2 or 3 years now. And it's in all the official languages, and they get thousands of entries every year, people writing about death and recovery. And, it's such a wonderful thing to do because it's part of our lives. I mean, the one thing we are sure of is we are going to die. We just don't know when. So, geez, I've just seen, this is very dark. Is it?
It's getting darker and darker. I think it's actually quite fitting that it's getting darker and darker, because we're moving to the point where we kind of fade out,
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
There's a comment here.
Shall I put a light on quickly, or is it okay?
We've got another. Yeah, put a light on. We've got about 5 more minutes or so. Yeah, put a light on. I think it's a great idea. Does nobody else have any questions? I'm going to read Barbara's comment now. But I thought maybe one
There-
or two more people would have something to say.
that can help. Yeah, okay, that helps. Yes, yeah. If anyone would like to ask anything about grief
Barbara
or
says,
death,
I just read Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking, which echoes much of your experience, and we all deserve happiness. And she's absolutely 100%. We all deserve happiness. You have to move on.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And her book is very powerful, Joan Didion, and she wrote two. The first one is The Year of Magical Thinking, that's right, and the second one is Blue Nights, because she also lost her daughter very soon after she lost her husband. So, I think it's that kind of multiple whammy that she writes about, which is very powerful. And of course, I was, in a sense, trying to emulate her when I talked earlier about producing a slim volume, just focusing on Robert's death. I was very much wanting to do something kind of slim and direct and intense and very focused. But then again, my book turned into something different. But yeah, I love those books.
Your book explores grief, which I really enjoyed that aspect of it as well.
Yeah. I think I just, wanted to, as I've said, broaden it out a little bit. Yeah.
I had to go and look at his Facebook page. After you described the cover photo with the finger of God pointing down and everything else, and I thought, okay, I have to go and find this one. And I was quite happy to see that the page is still up. And
oh yes, it's still there. Yeah, I need to memorialize it though. I think it's now time, because I still get little messages from Facebook. It's Robert Hichens' birthday today, and yeah, and if I'm getting those messages, I'm sure his friends are too. And at some stage. Yeah, it's another thing about grief. I think people around you have a difficult time with grief because, even my own children, they want you to get over it. They want you to be happy. And I would write messages to Robert on Facebook, on his page. And after a while, they just couldn't handle it. And I remember once Louise also came upstairs. Mom, you can't keep on writing to Robert on Facebook as if he's alive, as if he's going to come home at the end of the day or come home from holiday. So yeah, but and I talk about that as well, how people grieve on Facebook. And you can see it now with COVID, how people share their stories of loss, how they share their stories of the dying and the suffering of their loved ones. And so I think it does introduce a different way to share, and where death can be acknowledged and where loss can be acknowledged. So for me, it was really helpful to have Facebook, and people were so supportive. A lot of people I knew, but also just new friends, people that said, I don't know you, but I'm following your story, and that it kind of meant something to me. So so I think it can be a very powerful place. So you went because. For those that don't know, I talk about it as a premonition. My husband was very anti-religion, organized religion. And because he was an artist, he would fool around with images of himself. And in this one, he'd stuck God's finger coming through a cloud, and God's finger was pointing right at him. And I think that he was basically taunting God, saying, look at me, I'm going to just play with you and do all these strange things with you visually. And and then God smote him, as we say in my family. So it's now we're very respectful towards religion in case we get smote. So
at least you can talk about it now, and have a
we
conversation about it and laugh about it.
Yeah, and he had a great sense of humor. So we've got to actually also just venerate his sense of humor and celebrate him as the lovely man he was. And I think that does happen with grief as well. You get over the guilt, you get over the fights, the arguing, I should have done this, I should have said this, I should have driven to the hospital faster. And I ultimately was able to accept that's the way it happened. And and it goes in stages, those Kubler-Ross stages. I think you had a grief counselor once talking to people who was fantastic.
Yeah, Coralie
Coralie, yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, those stages, they don't always go, you know, anger, denial, acceptance. They don't go in a particular order. They come and go as they please. So you can be angry one day and then you accept things. And, you know, 5 years later, you have a crying jag because it's so unfair that, you know, the husband is not there for the wedding or whatever comes up in the family. So,
There's just
I mean, I see we're 8 o'clock now. So yeah, I mean, it's over.
I just want to pop this one question to you, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
From your experience, what advice would you have for people in terms of what to do or say to a person who has lost a loved one?
To say and do, I think just to be there for them. You know,
You don't even have to talk.
Take them a meal. Just be there. Yeah, I mean, some of the advice I got, you know, and I actually accepted all the advice because I kind of think I knew that people were being kind. So even if people might have said the wrong thing or, you know, he's in a better place now or whatever, it's, you know, just brush it off. This person is trying to be helpful. But yeah, just to be there. And I mean, I also joined a group on Facebook called Grief Beyond Borders, Grief Beyond Belief. And, you know, if you're on a group like that, you just read every single day, somebody is dying, somebody is struggling, and people just tell their stories and people are validated and their grief is validated. And, you know, so a group like that, the people who have been through this kind of group, no one is saying, oh, you must get over it. You know, you've got to be there for your kids. So they allow the grief. So I would say that if anything, you know, people should just allow that person to grieve in whatever way they need to. And grieving people can be unpredictable and angry and drink too much and say inappropriate things. And I've read this in a lot of memoirs. So yeah, reading, but yeah, what to say to a person in grief. Just I don't know, give them a hug. You're there. Here's a macaroni.
Long, uncomfortable ones, you know, where people start to squirm.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. So yeah, and maybe there just isn't the right thing either, you know. But I would say the grieving person could do something for themselves, which is go to therapy, join a group where people are talking about loss. Just, you know, be with people who really understand, because I think unless one's been through that sort of loss, you know, you do understand on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level, it helps to be with other people who've also lost on that emotional level. So yeah, I think, yeah, sorry, I wish I had the answer for whoever asked. Maybe there's no.
But I think that's the truth. I don't think there is. I don't think there is something that you can say. I mean, you know, you're just going to change feet if you start saying, well, he's in a better place or something like that. It's just, for me, it would be a case of just be there. You don't have to speak.
Be there.
Yeah, you can sit and read a book, but the person's not alone. And I think that's probably.
They're not alone. Yeah.
Well, on that not alone point.
Yeah.
When we chatted earlier today, you said you were offering a special price on books because it's
yes. We're going into a reprint. So if anyone here would like to order it, it's I'm selling it for 250 Rand, and it retails for 320 at exclusives. So, and I will drop it off anywhere in Cape Town. So you can always just send Mandi a note if you are interested, but there's no pressure at all. But I just thought,
but buy a book.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to extend that offer to the group, I'd be very happy to.
That would be fantastic, and I'll share it with the group. That'd be awesome. Unfortunately, if it's got to come up from Cape Town, people, there are courier fees involved. But maybe if we put them all together. Maybe if there are a few and we put them together, we can, you know, sort of distribute the courier fee.
I mean, I could always send them to you and people can pick them up or whatever.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
I mean, if there is, we can make a plan. Yeah,
absolutely. Joanne, it's been fantastic chatting to you. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this evening.
You had suggested I read something, but I think we're out of time now.
I don't know. Is anybody? I forgot about that. Thank you for remembering. I'm quite happy to go on. I made the Zoom session a bit longer, please. But is everybody happy with that?
Yes.
Yeah,
well, I'll tell you what I can do. I'll read the very last page, which is not going to.
It's not a spoiler alert, right?
It's not a spoiler alert. Is it? Let me just see if I can find it. But it's a little bit. It's about COVID, so it'll take 2 minutes. 23rd of March, 2020. The bride is marrying for the first time in her later years, dressed in a sheath of shimmering blue sequins. She walks barefoot across the white sand of Arniston Beach towards the water, towards her soon-to-be husband waiting for her in his suit and tie, and the officiating priest in white robes trimmed with gold. The wind is howling off the sea, blowing back from those gathered closer to the elegant gazebo decorated with white proteas. I perch on the rocks, away from the action, nervous, wondering if we have all placed ourselves at risk and how this will pan out. I watch the guests, no one getting too close, as the priest begins. Dearly beloved, we have gathered here together. The numbers are close to 50, way under the maximum of 100 the government will allow. Some guests have come from overseas. Are they tainted? Many others were unable to travel from foreign shores. The invisible virus crossing borders is terrifying. International flights are restricted. Airports are shutting down. In Italy, Spain, and America, thousands are suffering horrible, lonely deaths. No one is immune. At least we are outside. But even the bracing sea air does not feel safe. Nothing feels safe. Even here at this wedding, death is the uninvited guest, threatening to bring COVID-19 to the crowd. And yet the presence of the gatecrasher is acknowledged by the bride and groom themselves as they declare, "Till death do us part." That night, I lie in bed thinking of love, of what I have lost. I miss you. Surely this will be over soon. This virus will be quelled. The planes will be back in the skies, and I will travel to our Greek island. Little do I know that all through the months ahead, while Death and the After Parties is in production, we will remain in lockdown. We stay home, we buy plonk on the black market, we bang pots and blow vuvuzelas every night, celebrating essential healthcare workers. Anyone who can helps feed the nation. We face an uncertain future. Hand sanitizing, social distancing, and wearing masks is our new way of life. But that is another story. And yet it is the same story, a story of death and disease, of mourning, of longing, a story of overcoming challenges previously unimagined, a story of loss, but also of gains. There we go. So
thank you.
That'll just give you an idea of my style, and and we're still in this, facing death, facing loss all the time. So thank you so much everyone for being here, and thank you Mandi for
such a pleasure. Thank you.
I really have enjoyed talking about it, and thank you.
Thank you very much everybody. Joanne, thank you. Have a great evening and a great week, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.
Can I just take a photo, I'm sorry, of the screen? I always like to get my Zoom screen.
Zoom screen.
Cool. Yeah.
Bye guys.
Okay. Cheers. Bye.